job seekers in tech and where I meet folks in my network, have these conversations and interview them about best practices in interviewing and landing a job, and most importantly, understanding their job search journey and how they were able to navigate their career. So today I have a special guest, Todd Baur. Fun fact, we actually recorded this last year. I screwed up with the software, didn't look very presentable at all as far as like putting it out to social. So followed up and said, hey, Todd, I royally screwed up, man. Can we re-record? So it was nice to have to jump back on after the holidays. And the cool thing is we've got more stories and we've got some more insights into, what Todd's up to and some of his best, hiring and interviewing practices. So again, I'm Henry, founder of Talent Roadmap. We interview job seekers and hiring managers in this case on best practices for their job search journeys. So without further ado, I'll pass it to Todd for a quick intro and then we'll dive right into it. So Todd, all yours.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know where to start. I've been programming for a long time. Been in a bunch of startups and really active in the startup community here in San Diego. Worked in the federal space for a while. Yeah, kind of been all over. And so just hoping to share some of my stories and hope somebody catches it and hears something that makes it click in their brain and, see what happens.
Dude, really cool, man. Why did I think you were in Portland? See, I gotta get my feet. San Diego, you're just a quick 45-minute flight from me. So
yeah.
Come down to visit, bring the surfboard and whatnot. So I really wanted to ask, you said startups, but I know there's a lot more to your background. There's a lot more to what you've done in the past. So startups in the sense that, when you were working at some of these larger companies, nowadays they were startups back in the day. So can you maybe share quickly, not quickly, take as much time as you like, your story on the companies you worked for early on, how you got into those companies, how you learned programming. Obviously, there weren't any boot camps in the 90s. So, let's start from there, if you don't mind.
Oh, man. So back when the dark magic was written, right?
Yeah.
There's a funny meme about what did engineers do before Google, how did they find stuff? And so for me, it was going to Barnes and Noble, back then. Yeah. So, I would sit there and just read the book on Linux or Unix for hours and hours. I even one time they had a book with the Apache web server source code. You had to type it all into the computer from the book. That's how it was back then. And then, and then eventually, they came out and they had CDs and DVDs and stuff, and you could go that route. Man. That's how it was back then, because if you think back then, it wasn't really always convenient to just pass around the little 3.5 inch or whatever they were floppy disks, right? Yeah. You'd have 50 of them sometimes for, it was more complicated. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it was how you did it. It's funny you say that. Yeah. But all things in tech, they quickly advance. And I one of the things that I'm kind of real about now is with AI or what they're calling AI. I really don't want to call what they call AI today AI, because it's just large language models. And so for me, I was doing this stuff 10 years ago, and it wasn't as advanced as it is today, of course, but I never thought at the time we would just call it chat ops, right? And so if you go look at my GitHub, for example, I have all these things of various chat operational kind of things. Okay, you want to push code to the next stage, you want to load a GIF into your chat room, all that kind of stuff we had to write scripts for. And I had a language parser that we used that was pretty rudimentary back then. And, at the time we were just man, this kind of sucks. We wouldn't ever think to put this out as a product in its own right. We just kind of thought this was a toy for developers to kind of figure out how to do things a little bit faster and automate some parts of the job. Right. And so, it's kind of I told this story on LinkedIn too, but my grandfather talked about how when everybody started driving, you were a mechanic first and then you were a driver. And I think that's kind of the same thing with tech, was that I was a programmer first, and now I'm more of a consumer of AI than ever before, right?
Wow.
Dude, I think crazy. I think there's a lot of similarities, he would talk about how, people would drive around and they always just carried some copper wire around. And if somebody was broke down for, because batteries were awful back then, they would just take the copper wire and touch the terminals together and give them a boost, right? And then somebody came along and was like, let's put some alligator clips on that. And they got a patent for it. And now, you know what I mean? Now they have jumper cables, right?
Interesting.
And that's what I think about like ChatGPT is it's just the jumper cables of what we were doing 10 years ago.
That's a very good analogy. So I can't let you just skim over Barnes and Nobles and libraries. Like we were doing that in the 90s, man. And I'm so glad you brought it up because it really, I mean, it's not like necessarily you get like a gold star for cutting your teeth and in the trenches, but that was just the norm for us. Like creating CDs, DVDs, even gaming on like, was it 48 kilobytes of bandwidth? What was
56K was like, well, 56K was amazing, right?
Yeah, because the data we were pushing wasn't necessarily, we're not doing video like in the 90s. No. I think 96, AOL came out. But it was actually real fun to go to Barnes and Nobles and read some books a bit and go to the library and read some books. And I think when you mentioned CDs, internally I was like, oh, that's when everything changed, right? That's when everybody was staying at home with their computers and, you know, playing StarCraft or, you know, whatever other, you know, what is it called? Massive multiplayer online nowadays, but back then it was just like LAN networking and
MUDs. We had MUDs, remember?
Yeah. So crazy. And that was only 25 years ago, we'll call it, maybe 30 years.
Yeah.
It's insane how far we've
come. It seems like a different world, right?
It's so crazy. Like phones attached to the walls with cords. Anyhow, that was just kind of nice to even think about. Very cool childhood, I guess. But so as far as your career journey, you worked at, and correct me if I'm misremembering, if that's even a word, Yahoo, eBay. eBay. And what were the other companies?
So I, you know, I was living here in San Diego and basically after the Marines, moved out here and I was doing a lot of work with Apple at the time. And so just kind of like consulting and doing like, you know, that kind of thing for a bunch of businesses out here like HP and some other ones.
Early Apple, like.
Okay. Yeah. It was just like what brought me in, honestly, like speaking of like going to Barnes and Noble was that like I was just really passionate about Unix. Like I used Unix at my job in the Marines and stuff like pretty heavily and stuff. And so when Apple and Steve Jobs came back and they brought Unix to the core with Mac OS, I was like, hell yeah, like this is awesome. Right. And so I was just really like pumped and jazzed about it. And, you know, a lot of enterprises at the time were interested in it as well, because like it was kind of, you know, back then, like Linux on the desktop wasn't really like, and still really isn't a thing, but like Mac OS was like this sort of weird animal where like you could have Windows stuff without like the Windows problems, you know, of the attitude. This was just the attitude or the sentiment back then, right?
It's still the truth now though, right?
I don't know. I mean, I think like the problem with Microsoft at the time was Steve Ballmer, not the software itself. Like they had good software, you know, but Steve Ballmer's like attitude and marketing perception of things was really like counterintuitive to how the industry should actually work. And so I think with their current leadership, not including just the CEO, who I absolutely adore, but like just the whole leadership that they have now, where like they're sharing more stuff. There's more stuff that's cross compatible with Linux. Like, you know, you can run Linux apps on a Windows machine a lot easier now than you could ever before. Like all that is like really important. And, you know, back then that wasn't a thing. And so, you know, for Apple, like having Unix was a big advantage, because now like not only could they like pull in Microsoft Office and those like, you know, business apps that like people didn't really have a great experience with on Linux, right? They had that. You could have gaming, right? So there was a viable option because Apple was backing it. And then you had this Unix underpinnings. So for like a developer, it was the best machine you could get, right? Yeah.
Well, I'm learning something new right now. I thought Mac OS was on Linux. It's not?
Well, it's actually based on BSD, which is the Berkeley Standard Distribution. It's a little bit different than Unix in that, or Linux in that. Like Linux is a monolithic kernel, and BSD is a micro architecture, so more modular and a little bit better architecture. So
wow. So like when we discuss microservices nowadays, like this architecture was pretty much built into BSD.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, software patterns are patterns, right? Like in the same vein, like woodworking, you have certain joints that you use in certain situations. Like,
Okay.
Yeah, this stuff goes way, way back. Yeah.
Holy smokes. So Apple was built on Unix. Windows was built on Linux.
No, Windows was its own thing. It wasn't built on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. I'm much smarter than this, guys. If you're watching, I promise you I know what I'm doing. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
So how did you get into your first role at Apple? I mean, you mentioned it and you just kind of like,
yeah.
Where did that happen? How did that happen?
I was just consulting a lot, and then they started doing the retail stores, and I got a job basically working at the retail stores and doing consulting there, and just kind of hanging out and helped with a lot, because I also when I came to the retail stores here, like I came with a lot of like contacts in the business world in San Diego. Right, so it was a really big advantage for our store, because I was able to like network and connect us with like those clients. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
So studied at Barnes and Nobles. Was there a connection you made at Apple at the time, or was it just more so after post Marine Corps? Thanks for your service, by the way. I keep forgetting you were in the Marines and stuff. So was there a transition program in the Marine Corps?
No.
How that happened? Yeah.
No, it's just hustle. It was just really hustle. I don't really know how I fell into it. I think it just sort of like through connections. Like honestly, like one of the things that I loved about working at Apple was like their training for employees is fantastic. It was one of the best I've ever experienced. All the way from just topics like customer service and how to just like handle that stuff. Those are all like trainings I still use and repeat today. And, what my introduction to that is that, before I got out, I was working for the school district out there in Yuma, Arizona. And we went to a training on, Mac OS 10 server, because we were rolling it out at the time, and I didn't know what I was doing, honestly. Like I had an idea of how to do programming and stuff, but and so going to that training, I was just like, I learned so much in like an 8-day period that we were at that training. And, I honestly still use a lot of those like learnings to this day, even though like it's not Mac OS related. It was all Unix stuff, and that stuff like, is still around. So, I made a lot of connections there, and then, we all kind of stayed in touch, and we've, and I think that's like one of the most important things you can do in this industry is like, it's so social and so, fast paced and stuff, that like having a good network to like support you is like more important than anything else. Cause I think a lot of people who are trying to break in don't have that. And that's like, it's really hard, because if you can't network and find out like who's hiring where, then you have a lot harder barrier to entry, right?
Right.
You don't have a reputation. You don't have, past experiences or shared experiences with people.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting, man. I think for the most part, folks I talk to on this podcast, it all boils down to networking in some way, shape, or form, right? I think from a hiring perspective, oftentimes when I get referrals or I refer folks in, people typically only refer the best people they know, right? And either that's through, outside, activities, we'll call it softball or something, or meetups or conferences, or if you've worked with this individual in the past, or if you were in the service with them, or whatever, right? Insert your variable. I think when we think of interviewing and landing a job, you think of like, studying for, some lead coach style interview and pitching yourself and aligning yourself to the job and why you're the best fit. When my most like memorable engagement with candidates, either me interviewing them or I'm a candidate in the process, is when you just have conversations. And I think if that's online, fantastic. Learn how to write and communicate and type and express yourself through, that digital space, but also in person. I think there was a lot of value growing up when we did, right? Being outside and going to the library and picking up a book. Not to say that it's changed or it isn't high leverage nowadays to be online, but there's a specific energy that's transferred when you kind of meet in person. You do things that are, I guess, made for humans, right?
For sure.
Being in person.
For sure.
So you're not the first person to tell me like, it's just networking. And even though it may be oversimplified, it really is just, I think, if you meet someone, just be curious about what they do, where they're from, basic stuff like that. And it's always led me to have just genuine relationships and good conversations, and even asking dumb questions about what people would think would be done. Is Microsoft on whatever operating, but it is an operating system. I'm looking stupid already, but being able to be like vulnerable in that aspect and try to learn, I think has helped. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, what else can you maybe share on some of the relationships you've built? Is it more out of curiosity or just serendipity? How did that all work for you?
No, I mean, just building on what I was saying about consulting for Apple, like, here in San Diego, just, running around to these different businesses. Like, I found myself talking to, directors and VPs and stuff all the time. Right. And then, in the vein of Apple, Steve Jobs once said, you can never connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking back. And
that's right.
And so, in doing that, I met some really just awesome people, and ended up getting my best friend a job working with one of these companies. And then after like a year of them working there, the director was like, hey, we're all going to move to San Francisco and you're coming with us. And I was like, well, that's awful presumptuous of you, right? But like, what makes you think I'm going to do that, right? But, sure enough, a few months later, he called me and he's like, hey, we got a plane ticket for you on Friday. Come up and spend the weekend with us. We're going to interview on Monday. And, you're going to be up here working in like the next month, right? And I was like, whoa. Like, what's the job, right? And he's like, don't worry, we'll figure it all out. And so that's how I ended up working at Build Me Later as a front-end person, was that, just because I had been doing consulting and I got my best friend a job at the company. Yeah.
So your best friend got a job at Apple through you?
No. My best friend was working at a whole totally different company. Okay. Nothing to do with Apple or anything like that.
Oh, so he had said, I'm moving to SF with this company. You're going to move
his
with
boss. Because so we all
consulting relationship. Oh my god.
Yeah, I had a consulting relationship with his boss. Yeah, for sure. And then then my best friend moved up there and was like, this is legit. This is the thing. Like, we're all going to do this. And then, I worked for them for almost 5 years.
That's insane. And I think so. I think what people might be missing here is, in that relationship you built with the director, there was an interview going on, right? You were kind of, feeling him out. He was feeling you out. Yeah. And I think after so many engagements with you and understanding who you are and how you operate, how you think, he was bold enough to say, yeah, you're going to come with us. Because I think he already knew there was that relationship. He probably asked you maybe, what do you feel like doing down the road in your future? And you said something like front end, and he's like, okay, cool, I got this role. Yeah. And it all just kind of tied together. And every conversation, man, is just an opportunity really to kind of understand what's next. And, who's going to be like kind of in your network or your life moving forward. Dude, I didn't hear this story last time. So like, you basically moved from San Diego to San Francisco proper?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
Yeah, I was in the
Did you regret it, or this is more like a SoCal, NorCal thing now?
No, even when I moved up there, I just had this like vibe that like San Diego was my home, like I've been to like a ton of cities now. And every time I come back and I make that like walk across to the parking lot and I see downtown, like off in the distance over in the Bay, and I get that whiff of, oleander and all that stuff there. And I'm just like, this is the life, and I don't really get that vibe when I go to other cities. And like, there's certainly tons of cities I enjoy and all, but there's just a feeling that like, this is your place. Like, this is your home.
I get it. That's very cool. Gosh, I might come visit sooner than later. I haven't been to San Diego in like years. But now that I picked up surfing, that's given me like the motivation to visit more coastal towns, cities. I'll call that. Very cool, man. So for those listening, Todd and I actually met through, was it Bets and Tech? No, Operation Code.
Operation Code, right.
Cynthia Cow invited us both to be speakers for a handful of folks in Operation, or that had just graduated from boot camps and whatnot. So we all came together. It was myself, Todd, and I believe his name is Michael Rosenberg. Michael, if you're watching, if I mispronounced your name or said the wrong last name, I apologize. And then we just talked about recruiting and hiring. And I think during like the speaking engagement, we were pinging each other on the side, like, "Hey man, that was a cool story," or "Hey, let's chat later." So in that same conversation, we were speaking, and we were like, professionals. We're chatting on the side, like, "Hey, let's catch up later. I like their story about X, Y, and Z." So that's an example of how networking could work, and we were just curious about each other's stories, really. Didn't realize, and he mentioned he was a Marine and 20 years of service, not service in the Marine Corps, but 20 years of plus years of programming. Mm-hmm. And I found that super interesting because, you don't often come across folks that have this type of experience that are willing to spend time and share knowledge openly to a group of veterans. So, there were some cool signals there. Yeah. Where am I going with this? Mostly wanted to share with you guys how we came, to this podcast today, to be quite honest. But what do you have going on now, Todd, as far as career? What are you solving for, building? You mentioned incubators recently.
Yeah, so I have a small agency called Baur Software, and we just have a small list of clients. We're not like on a growth spurt on there. We're more pivoting because we built a platform we call Order Arrow, and it's really geared at facility management and making like the silos that you traditionally see with like enterprise reporting platforms and stuff like that just like go away. It's a unique product in that when you have a task in the system, or like say a purchase order, you're processing warranty problems, you get a task-based chat room with it. And so everybody that's involved in that whole logistics chain gets pulled into that chat room, and you can all, openly talk about where products are, like what's going on with this service request, like, whatever you need to say there. And it all gets just filed away with the ticket. Mm-hmm. Yep.
That is a really good idea. At first I was like, ticketing. And then adding that particular feature removes it from Slack, right? Or whatever messaging service you're using. Mm-hmm. I just love when things make sense. And if you're having a conversation about a specific topic, it should be attached to that ticket.
Right.
That way, a week later, when you forget about it, you're like, oh, that's what we talked about. Or, that's what that ticket is. So can you, I guess maybe share more about, is that I guess the main use case for the product itself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're trying to be like more laser focused than most like of our competitors that are trying to just like throw out a bunch of features at once that don't necessarily all integrate with themselves even. It's very like, okay, now we've got history, financial history or whatever you want to call it, some kind of payments or whatever, and that's a whole other set of screens. And then it's like, oh, you want purchase orders, that's a whole other set of screens. And rather than us doing that, it was just like, hey, you want to figure out like what you guys were actually talking about. And what this is born out of is quite honestly is the Agile Manifesto. And like what you see today a lot in companies is people are, I talk to CTOs about this all the time because it's one of the things that just drives me absolutely insane about like the way people think about work. And they like a lot of CTOs are like, oh, I'm going to subscribe to secure Agile framework or, scaled Agile framework, or, we're going to do Kanban. And like, and the problem with that line of thinking is that like the tool solves the problem. And like, this is a trap like everybody in tech falls into so often is it's like, if we just had better statuses, like things would be different. And it's like, well, the statuses aren't really the problem. Like the problem is that you don't have a good solid communication channel set up for where everybody can participate equally. Right.
And that's go ahead.
And I think that's like what our like kind of core philosophy is with Order Arrow is that like, if you want to talk to people in different companies, go right ahead. Like you should be able to do that to solve your problem. Like, if we need oversight or you're worried about, data leaking out from your company or stuff, then that's a training issue. That's not really a software problem that you could solve. Right. Yeah. But there's like too many like CTOs and stuff subscribe themselves to the belief that they're going to find a tool that solves whatever they're faced with. And that's not a reality of dealing with people. Because speaking of this, if you've ever read the book, The Art of Deception by Kevin Mitnick, he talks about this a lot in his book and how like most of like Kevin Mitnick's hacking activities had nothing to do with programming at all. He would literally just call people up and be like, hey, I'm so-and-so from some department. I need your password. And the people would be like, okay. And they would do it. Because as humans, we just have this like willing desire to like want to help other humans. Right. And so we think that like, these sort of innocuous behaviors can, not cause problems, but we find out later Kevin Mitnick, did a lot of like crazy hacking because of it, because people gave him the keys. So anyway, that's like a segue, but yeah, I just think like with the, if you can rethink work in the vein of like what happens a lot with, especially in programming teams, is that you give them a problem, and then like as a organizational manager, you look at that and you're like, well, like you're supposed to be doing this workflow because that's your function. And like, then when you're done, you put it through this gate, and this other team like verifies whether or not like they can put it into their workflow. And it's supposed to like, they build these like complex charts and flows, but the reality is that the problem changes the workflow. And so if you don't allow for that, then you end up with, these sort of like blockers that happen all the time, where like teams, are sitting around waiting for the next thing to happen. And like, not that you have to over optimize, but like what usually that's because of lack of communication.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lack of visibility on that communication too.
I think, gosh. So tying this into like a interviewing loop or a hiring practice, and to your point too, as far as working with clients, the main issue that is trying to be solved, at least for me, in an interview, is the communication piece. Because without that, you can't articulate how well you know a certain type of framework or software or problem you're trying to solve, which is most important. And I think folks can take a lot from this, because I feel like even if you're hyper focused on this one feature, I shouldn't say even, that's sometimes the best idea or best way forward. Because anecdotally, as I built my job seeker playbook in Notion, I had this really grand idea, like I'll just build the entire interviewing process into this playbook, because my ideal customer is going to need all the steps in front of them. But for the most part, people didn't even read through my playbook. They said, well, this part was cool, this part was cool. And it's each individual user had a very specific need from the playbook. So what I'm going to do next, and this hasn't been kind of launched yet, but I'm going to basically dissect the entire playbook and make very small one-pagers, very simple, like almost like a landing page. If you have, and what it's trying to solve is if you have a need for resume updates, I'm going to give you a one Notion page. It's all about resume updates. If you're having trouble interviewing, it's going to be one Notion page for interviewing, LinkedIn, one Notion page for applying to jobs. And even to me, I'm like, that feels so much easier to navigate and understand that it's solving a very unique problem in my space. And the second example here, I was talking to a very good friend of mine who's been a data engineer, data scientist for 10, 15 plus years. And we were discussing a client problem that I'm having with the current company I'm working with, as far as us being able to solve issues and creating, meeting the deadlines for a specific product launch. And at the end of my, laying out the foundation and what we're trying to solve was like, you guys just have an observability issue. And I was like, oh, you're right. He goes, because if you think about the disconnect, it's really communication. And I'm finding it really interesting that almost every problem can be solved with a really good communication channel or system. So that's very cool that you're building that, man. And you're having some good traction, it sounds like.
Yeah, we're doing pretty good. So looking forward to, like, I just paired up with a good marketing and product officer. So it's good to have co-founders that believe in it too. And like, I think just as like kind of like solopreneuring it for a while, it's, I recognize, one of the, especially like as an entrepreneur, one of the things that I got handed as advice was that if it doesn't give you good energy, don't do it. Like give it to somebody who it does give good energy to. So, having them on the team now is just like a huge, like, thankfully, it's good to have them. So I'm really thankful for that. And then, just again, relying on the network I've built with the entrepreneurs here in San Diego, and it's kind of funny how, the community kind of like takes care of itself, and there's a lot of like here, I don't know if anybody's listening to this, like San Diego is one of the hardest startup markets there are. I mean, just the amount of VC money and like ideals and, everything from life sciences to, marketplaces, like it's all, happening here. And so, it's a good place to be if you're interested in getting into a startup.
Well, I didn't know that. I thought so. It sounded like you were saying it's very difficult to build out there, but you're saying it's actually really attractive to build out in San Diego because of the VC money.
Oh yeah,
deals. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, can't really beat the scenery either, right?
Yeah, I mean, just like last month, there's 4 incubators announcing for applications, and so and I don't even know what's this month. Yeah, I haven't even. I'm still trying to get caught up on the 4 from last month. So.
Yeah. Dude, what's cool what you just said is I like building alone for certain things, but I love building with other folks.
Oh yeah,
it's time to like get it out to market and working in a team, like a very good small team. There's a certain energy behind that. Like it's almost like a sports team or like a small squad in the military where things just gel. You feel like you're just having fun the entire way, right? You run into some roadblocks, but you laugh about it. If you laugh to yourself, that's probably more of a you can go see a doctor, but I'm just kidding. That was a joke, guys.
Well, it's that resiliency that you're talking about, that like as startup founders, like you're just like every day just feels overwhelming, like with the amount of challenges you have to get through. And like you have to be a little crazy in your brain and go, well, just put all that away because it's not a real problem, and just focus on like what's actually the thing I'm going to make an impact on today and move that forward.
Yeah. To that point, for this podcast, I didn't realize how much I wouldn't say admin work, but having to upload videos to YouTube and do the design portion, which I enjoy, but it's like every upload needs to have someone behind it pushing that button, and it's me right now. And I'm like, am I going to be able to enjoy this for the 50 episodes? Probably not, right? But I do like understanding the problem now that it would be really fun for someone else that maybe in high school or college to be able to upload these videos for me and write the show notes and add the links, because then they're learning something new and they're engaged in social or whatnot. And for me on my side, just seeing them go up and being watched by 5 people, 10 people, and getting some feedback is kind of where my head lies. So I'm just solving for myself right now in this conversation. Yeah, but anyhow.
I mean, it's one of the reasons I like working with Operation Code. Is just I have a soft spot in my heart for veterans, and especially veterans who are trying to break into tech, because in some ways, coming in from the 90s, like I have a little bit different perspective on stuff than folks today, and so just using my own network for their advantage is like it's just goodwill, really. Like there's no reason why if I have somebody in my network who's hiring for engineers, and like I've got somebody in Operation Code who I know is a solid engineer, I'm gonna put him up.
Yeah, I might spend some more time in OpCode.
Yeah.
And maybe just, ask for some more guests there to share their story, because that's a community that is often overlooked, because I think folks think we just are able to get jobs because we're, veterans, which is what I believe when I got out. I'm like, I'm going to get any job because, I have this background behind me, and it's absolutely not the case. I don't care what rank you are or what role you had in the military. So yeah, thanks for reminding me that that's probably a space I need to spend more time and meet some new folks.
Yeah, I mean, and on that same vote, like, if you don't have that network, like one of the easiest things you can do is volunteer. There's lots of volunteer organizations out there that work with veterans or like outside of Operation Code, like I volunteer for PATH, which is a local organization here called People Assisting the Homeless. And, we do food drives, hygiene drives, and, we have like a little leadership team of kids from elementary to high school that are, organizing their friends and stuff to do these drives. And so it's been a good experience. And like, even that has like opened me up to, leaders in the community. And, I found opportunities that way too, that, even if it's something that like I'm not interested in or have the bandwidth to do myself, I know someone in my network who does. So that's how it works.
Yeah. So, thanks for doing that. A PATH, is that up north as well, or here in the Bay Area? Is it nation?
Yeah, they have several locations. It's a really great organization. Like I think a lot of the um, myths about homelessness are sort of canceled out by their programs.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
like the biggest myth is that like, oh, if you're homeless, you're probably like a junkie, and that's which is one that drives me crazy, because a lot of times like the folks I'm working with, they're just veterans that like they lost their friends and family in war times, or they're struggling with PTSD, and so like they're getting help for that. And so I don't know if you don't mind if I can plug, like we have a program where for $10 you can buy a Chromebook for a veteran who's experiencing homelessness. Yeah. And we give these Chromebooks to them, and they can scale up. They can use it to organize their VA appointments and to get help. I mean, it's a life-changing thing to have a laptop when you're homeless. And
dude, yeah. And I'm definitely gonna take a look at this in the SF Oakland area. And this sounds like an amazing.
It's a great program, yeah. So just to circle back on that, like just to build your network, get involved with stuff like that. It doesn't have to be homelessness; it could be anything that you're cause that you believe in, and there's other people there who are also believe in that, and you'd be surprised at like how many great like startup ideas can come out of just doing that.
So yeah, I didn't even think of volunteering as like a networking tactic. I hate saying tactic, but that's what people call it. Strategy, yeah. Right? Yeah. And I've always wanted to volunteer, like during the holidays, like soup kitchens and stuff like that. I just never get around to it. But if I could do something like this on a more consistent basis, 3-4 blocks away from where I live, yeah, that'd be fantastic. So yeah, definitely we'll add this to the show notes. What else you got going on, man? Yeah, spill the beans.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, so father of 2 kids, 7 and 9-year-old, absolutely adorable, and we're big Lego builders. And I know you probably see this mess in my garage, but I do a lot of like PC building and woodworking. Nice. And yeah,
very cool. So I guess closing up or wrapping up, one, I guess it's going to be networking again. Networking for 100 points, Alex. Best, maybe a last tip for folks on their job search journey, and then where can they find you online?
Yeah, sure. I would just say the most important thing is just don't give up, but also know when to quit. It's just a tough thing. There's a good book called The Dip, and it talks about like knowing when to start, when to stop, and when, all that stuff. Recommend that book. Check it out. Another one I love is by Ira Glass, and he talks about, and it resonates with me pretty well. It's just like when you're young and you're starting out, that, the thing that got you in the game is your taste, that you build stuff and, you look at it and, it's just kind of missing something, like, and it's that taste, that looking at it and introspection that drives you to do better, right? And rather than give in to that monster and let it become this thing that consumes like your thoughts of like negativity, use it for motivation, and do a lot of work, like turn in stuff more often, like put stuff out for feedback, like take good feedback in, throw out bad feedback. Like it's just all part of the creative process. And so if you can go through that and learn and grow and then share those stories like in places like this, then you'll find out that you're not alone, and that, you actually are doing really good work, but that the thing that drives you is always going to be there, no matter how long you've been doing it, no matter how good you are at it. Like, there's always something better you could do. And like, especially in programming, I find this is true. Like I turn in stuff all the time where I'm like, this is probably some of the best code I've ever written. And people are like, well, it could be better. And I'm like, dang it, you're right.
Yeah.
And so it's just part of the game, and, just don't be afraid to dive into it and keep going.
Dude, right on, man. That was super cool. Speaking of books, and I have another thought as well. These two, I just noticed in the back here. Don't follow me.
Oh, no.
Teddy bear. I picked up this book 2018. I was Googling hiring for technical roles, and this is written by Joel Spolsky, former CEO of Stack Overflow. And the entire premise on this book is just hire people that are smart and get things done.
Mm-hmm.
Because through that type of hiring, they can solve the problems you're looking for. And there's also like ideas around hiring interns, helping them grow in their careers, which is like a retention strategy. But it's also like, hey, folks that kind of want like find a place that they really, really enjoy. There needs to be a growth path too. And then it talks about that as well. So if you guys are watching, this is a very good book to read. It's like 100 pages or whatever. Recently picked up this and went through this in 3 days. Nicholas Cole, The Art and Business of Ghostwriting. And don't let
that's a good one.
Yeah, it's crazy because now that we live online, writing is such a huge skill set to, I wouldn't say you have to master it, but if you understand how to write in certain tones and personas and voices, you can then accelerate some of the things that you'll need for your career or accelerate things that you'll want to do for other folks as clients or whatnot. And I found that this was a real surprise for me. I was like, okay, it's going to be a good book, but then I read it, I'm like, holy shit, this is actually fantastic. Because I like writing as well. And if you think about it, in tech and in software, you're doing documentation, right?
Yeah.
And that needs to not be dry as hell for people to, want to follow your footsteps and what you're building and whatnot. So
we could do a whole other podcast on writing in the age of AI and all that and stuff. And
yeah,
so how to,
for sure, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think that game is changing a lot too because of large language models and all that. So
yeah, we're doing one soon. It's moving fast. I wanted to share one more thing that I forgot. Anyhow, it'll come back to me. But yeah, social. So you're on LinkedIn, obviously.
Yep, Toad Kicker.
Toad Kicker. Okay.
Yep.
Oh, wait, I gotta ask now.
Back in high school, I was actually in rodeo, and so, and I was a very different person back then. I, wearing Wranglers and cowboy boots, and my first name being Todd. All my high school friends were calling me Toad, and with the rodeo boots, I was Toad Kicker, and so.
Dude, that's very cool, man.
Yeah, so it just stuck.
Yeah. I like that. I like it a lot. Well, my nickname was Hendo only because my name's Henry.
Right.
And I guess if it just became a thing, it was, I don't know, I forgot how that happened, but.
The best nicknames are given to you,
Yeah. Definitely wasn't in rodeo. Could have been, actually. Anyhow, dude, another great chat, man. Thanks again for your time. We'll talk more down the road. If there's something else, I'll see you in San Diego one day.
I look forward to it. Happy to host you.
Yeah, right on, man.
All right, yeah. We'll see you.
See you guys.